As a fan of pro wrestling and becoming part of the internet wrestling community, I guess, it's interesting. Usually you go on as a fan and you go to find other fans of the things that you like so you can discuss your fandom and the things that you're excited about said thing. Of course, over the last 5 to 10 years, that is now a little bit different where it's not about that. It's going on to find fans of other things so you can go trash them. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Rantin review. We were talking today about the big news this week from AEW All Elite Wrestling, which is a huge shakeup. I did discuss it briefly on my podcast, which you can check out by subscribing to my podcast down below or subscribing to my mailing list where you will get informed when my new podcasts are out. But the big news that came out for AEW is that AEW has some changes in its contract with Warner Media. So what's happening now is that AEW Dynamite is moving from TNT on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 to TBS on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10. In addition to that, they are also going to be getting an extra hour of TV and a new show called Rampage, which they've been talking about for the last year or so, which will be airing on Friday nights on TBS at 10 p.m. to 11 p.m., which is right after WWE SmackDown show, which airs on Friday nights from 8 to 10, which is a brilliant move, which a lot of us have said that, these wrestling companies should have done, even though the Monday Night Wars were very celebrated and was a big time and all of that stuff. The world is a different place than it was 25 years ago. And as we saw with the Wednesday Night Wars, it actually winds up hurting the shows more than it helps them because it's a different time now. So having AEW Rampage airing right after SmackDown makes Friday night a pretty big night for pro wrestling across the board, especially if you are a wrestling and sports entertainment fan. You get 3 hours of programming that's not one programming. You get to see a lot of different stuff in the genre of wrestling, which is pretty cool. And in addition to that, they're still going to be on TNT because they're getting 4 network specials on TNT that are going to air every quarter, fall, spring, winter, summer, much the same way they do their pay-per-views. It's very similar to the old NWA Crockett WCW Clash of the Champions shows that they would air like that every so often as special network events. And the same thing with the old WWF, which would have Saturday night's main event every so often on NBC. The other benefit of that also is that as opposed to the 6, 7, or 8 times a year they're being preempted on TNT right now because of obligations to air other programming over on TBS, they're not going to be preempted as much. I think it'd be fairly rarely preempted on TBS. And again, they're getting the extra show, which also gives more hours of content now, at least 80 hours more of content a year for AEW. More exposure, obviously. They're on 2 networks now. And obviously the increase in time and the increase in ad revenue means the increase of money for AEW. So they're going to be making more money than they were even with the lucrative deal that they got last year for being on TNT with Dynamite. Now, any rational person will look at this and go, well, damn, that's pretty good. More hours, more money, more exposure. You're on a network that is synonymous with wrestling, that has been synonymous with wrestling since cable networks started, and picking up that old legacy of Georgia Championship Wrestling and World Championship Wrestling. I guess I should explain that because I have to keep constantly remembering it's obvious that a lot of people don't know a lot about their wrestling history who claim to be fans. TBS was one of the first, if not the first, cable network to really embrace wrestling. That was Ted Turner's big thing. From Georgia Championship Wrestling, Mid-South, later on to what was called World Championship Wrestling, the name of the TV show that was run by the NWA Jim Crockett Promotions, and of course later with WCW. WCW, TBS, in fact, I distinctly remember there was a particular Clash of the Champions back in the early 90s where they were celebrating the fact that wrestling had been on TBS for 20 years. And it would go on to be on TBS for another 10 years after that. So for a good 2 to 3 decades, wrestling was synonymous with TBS. And this went back before Vince McMahon was even running the WWF. So the history and the legacy of pro wrestling on TBS is pretty significant. Again, some people out there don't know that. And like I said, given all this news with AEW, those people found a way to somehow spin this news as a negative for AEW. I'm not kidding you. They managed to find a way to spin this as a negative for AEW. Now, before we get into these mental gymnastics that these people did, I want to remind you, though, that this is being YouTube. hitting that like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell. That's very helpful to the channel and gets other people who are interested in this topic to be aware of it, because YouTube's little gremlins behind the scene will go, hey, people like this video, so when you show it to other people who have watched videos about AEW. So I appreciate that if you guys do that. Go down in the description box and hit those little buttons and turn them blue, and the little bell dings and all that other stuff. And might as well subscribe to the channel while you're there. I appreciate it. So this gets into my fascination with the internet wrestling community. I'm going to actually call it that at this instance, because this was fascinating. And I have seen some delusional stuff before in my time. I've seen some crazy stuff in my lifetime. My first degree is in psychology. So what I'm seeing now with this whole thing with AEW, I think has to be one of the worst cases of mass delusion, I guess you have to call it that I've ever seen in my life. It is absolutely insane. But yes, there are people out there who are spinning this as a negative for AEW, and it comes from a lot of ignorance. So a lot of you probably were online the other day and you're like, wow, AEW came up, they did really good, yada, yada, yada. And then you would probably see stuff like this.
Another part of the problem is that our brain is constantly protecting our worldview and sense of identity. So when our worldview is challenged, that same part of the brain that processes physical danger gets activated. This is why people sometimes react so aggressively to information that proves them wrong. Several studies have also shown that there is a backfire effect that happens when people encounter facts that contradict their current beliefs. They actually become more convinced of their original ideas. So fighting ignorance with facts is like fighting a grease fire with water.
You know, if these were jokes, I would find it to be amusing, but the sad thing about it is these people are not joking. They're actually serious about this. One of the things that I find out, again, back to, you know, just being in the internet wrestling community and looking at it from the perspective of a fascinating case study on mental health, is that there is a pattern to how this stuff happens. And, you know, a lot of psychologists have been examining this over the last 10 years. And I've been reading up a lot of those papers. And it's really funny that it kind of applies to this situation. I see it right here, right now with this. Somebody will come around and they'll say they don't like AEW. And they'll do something like that. Wait a minute, AEW got... What? This sounds like good news for AEW. I hate AEW. Let me go look. There's gotta be something. There's gotta be something. There must be something to say that this is bad. Now, a lot of these people, they don't like, and it just doesn't apply to AEW. It could apply to WWE. It could apply to Roman Reigns. It could apply to Cody Rhodes. It could apply to Kenny Omega. It could apply to Daniel Bryan. It could apply to anything, especially in the wrestling community. And what a lot of times these people, you ask them, well, what is the problem? They really don't know. But they've seen other people that they think look cool saying negative things about this thing, or there maybe was an aspect of the show that they didn't like, or maybe they have loyalty to something else and they don't like this thing for some reason. So they will go find every opportunity to go trash it, and this is what they do with their day. So in this case, when you have a lot of positive news for something that they don't like, what they will then do is they will go to a place to find other people who don't like this thing, I don't know, like a Reddit board, and then go on that Reddit board and see all the other people who have this mental affliction, and then they go and somebody in there will find some way to spin it, and then they'll take that spin and then go out to the rest of social media and spread it like herpes. In this case, with all of the stuff that we talked about that AEW just got with this new deal that they've worked out with Warner Media, the best thing that these people seem to have come up with is that TBS is a comedy network. Despite the fact that TBS, again, has been around for over 45 years, was one of the historic places for pro wrestling on television, that the TBS and the Warner Media executives even say there's not much of a difference between TBS and TNT anyway. They're both their flagship stations, their sister stations, despite the fact that TBS is in a couple thousand more homes than TNT is. Despite any of this stuff, despite the fact that they're getting more ad revenue and getting paid more money for this contract with them being on TBS, but none of that matters because TBS had a logo amongst the 12 or 15 times they've changed the station's identity over the last 40 some odd years. They had a logo that said TBS was for comedy, which they actually changed that logo 6 years ago, but that doesn't matter. It helps them, it gives these people something to go make this great news for AEW into a negative of some sort. An actual person who claims to be a journalist that I've talked to online who does this. Again, they're a journalist who doesn't actually go and do research for data. They get their news and their primary sources from a Reddit page of people that hate a lot of different things about wrestling. At a certain point, it gets into a point of absurdity because it doesn't matter to them. They will keep throwing out these absurd notions like, oh, the reason why they didn't get the second show is because Tony Khan's pal at Warner Media left last year, so that's why they didn't get the second show. Well, no, they got the second show. Oh, well, they got demoted to the secondary channel. TBS is more homes than TNT and has been around forever and it's had wrestling on its network for like the majority of its existence until WCW went out of business. Well, that doesn't matter. There's comedy shows on there. There's comedy shows on the USA Network. SmackDown used to be on the freaking Sci-Fi channel. Well, you're a mark, and only AEW fanboys would say something like that. Somebody actually sent me that. That's this very interesting thing that I did notice too, and somebody else I read in a psychological journal pointed this out about social media. When irrational people are confronted with facts that countermand the craziness that they have in their head, their response is never to be able to actually counter the facts with actual facts. They'll spin off onto other stories, they'll insult you, they'll insult whatever, and this really strange thing about ending everything with a laughing gif or a laughing emoji. Which is, again, strange because, I guess in their head that putting a gif of somebody laughing after they make some crazy statement means that they've won the argument or something, but in reality, it actually is just exemplary of their manic insanity. At the end of all of this, again, it's what I always kind of stress on this channel is, again, I'm not a big fan of WWE, for instance, but when WWE does things that are cool, like they have 20,000 fans back at WrestleMania. Not going to deny that they had 20,000 fans back at WrestleMania or that was a good thing for WWE. The change to Roman Reigns as the tribal chief was a good thing for WWE. Randy Orton and Edge had an outstandingly fantastic match last year. One of the best in the last 5 years. Even though I'm not a big fan of WWE and I don't watch them, I barely watch them at all anymore. I can admit when I do see them doing good things or when I see news that is a positive for the company, I'm not going to try to go on Reddit or go on some dark web place to go find other people who hate WWE, who twist and spin some fact around in some nonsensical way that isn't even accurate. At the end of the day, this is big news for AEW. Despite all of this insanity that has gone on online about it, the big deal is that AEW is continuing to grow and expand. It does kind of explain now why they've been stockpiling all these wrestlers for the last year, which a lot of us were like, man, there's not even enough TV time for all these wrestlers that they have and all these factions that they've made. Well, now it makes a lot more sense, the fact that they're getting another hour of television and they're going to be having 4 network specials on TNT over the course of 2022. So AEW continues to grow and expand, and more power to them, because this just means, again, there are more places for wrestlers to work. There's going to be different kinds of wrestling and different kinds of wrestlers that we're going to get to see, because everything is not under one person's vision anymore. And that is a good thing, because the movie industry would suck if it was all one type of movie. The music industry would suck if it was all one type of music. TV industry would suck if it was only one kind of TV show. Everything would suck if it was only one person's vision for this entire industry. And fortunately, the wrestling industry is getting past that again. The monopoly has ended, and I, as a wrestling fan, am happy that even on Friday nights, if I feel like watching sports entertainment, then I can watch sports entertainment. But if I don't like what was on SmackDown, then then Rampage comes on afterwards, and I'll get to see a slightly different style of wrestling. Or maybe if maybe Rampage wasn't that good that week, but what happened on SmackDown was awesome. So I get good stuff as a wrestling fan, because again, I think it's high time that some of us stop doing this brand nonsense. My biggest hope, though, is that I doubt that's going to happen anytime soon, but eventually this kind of thought will, get out through the industry more and the fan base more, and people will, again, like I've always said, look at wrestling like any other genre of entertainment. There are multiple different people making soap operas and comic books and movies and video games, and the wrestling industry should be no different. There should be multiple different companies, multiple different styles, multiple different genres, and as a fan of wrestling, you should be able to watch them all and enjoy them when they're good and criticize them when they're bad. And that's it for this news break here on Rantin Review. I want to know what you guys think about this stuff. What do you think about AEW's new deal with Warner Media? What do you think about this illness, mental illness on social media in the wrestling community? And what can we do to kind of grow up from this stuff? Because it's driving a lot of people away from it. It's driving me away from discussing wrestling online, and I know it's done that for a lot of other people too. Let your voice be heard in the comment box below. Until then, I will see you guys next time for more news, rumors, and commentary right here on the Rantin Review. Have a good day.